Sup YouTube, video number 4. I'm gonna go kind of fast because I want to get this all in 10 minutes. This video is about two versions of the same story. It's the story of Paul actually meeting with the apostles. It happens very few times in the scriptures as it is. This particular meeting was Paul and Barnabas going to Jerusalem. First thing I want you to note is in Acts 15 and 7, where this is recorded, the question of who is the Gentile apostle is effectively answered. Acts 15 and 7 says, "And when there had been much disputing, Peter rose up and said unto them, Men and brethren, ye know how that a good while ago God made choice among us that Gentiles by my mouth should hear the word of the gospel and believe." Now, according to this same situation, this is what Paul had to say in Galatians 2 when he's recounting his Jerusalem experience with the apostles. He says in Galatians 2 and 7, "But contrariwise, when they saw that the gospel of the uncircumcision was committed to me, as the gospel of the circumcision was unto Peter, for he wrought effectually in Peter to the apostleship of the circumcision, the same was mighty in me toward the Gentiles." Now, we just read in Acts 15 and 7 that Peter stood up and basically reminded everyone that he was indeed the apostle to the Gentiles. Here in Galatians 2 and 7, he's claiming that in that particular meeting, they recognized him as the apostle to the Gentiles. Somebody's lying. Galatians 2 and 9 says, "And when James, Cephas, who is Peter, and John, who seemed to be pillars, perceived the grace that was given unto me, they gave to me and Barnabas the right hands of fellowship, that we should go unto the heathen, and they to the circumcision." Again, in Acts 15 and 7, Peter rose up and said unto them, "Men and brethren, ye know how that a good while ago God made choice among us, that the Gentiles by my mouth should hear the word of the gospel and believe." That's contradiction number 1. Number 2, the sentence came down, or what they decided in this meeting, is on 4 basic things that these new Gentile converts should adhere to. And in Acts 15 and 19 it says, "Wherefore my sentence," this is James, "that we trouble them not which from among the Gentiles are turned to God, but that we write unto them that they abstain from pollutions of idols, and from fornication, and from things strangled, and from blood." This is what Paul said that they said to him in Galatians, this same meeting. This is what he says that their sentence was. Galatians 2 and 10 says, "Only they would that we should remember the poor, the same which I also was forward to do." Now he's claiming that the only thing they said was to remember the poor, when again, if you look back in Acts 15 and 20, it says that they are to abstain from pollutions of idols, from fornication, from things strangled, and from blood. It says nothing about anybody poor in that scripture. That's contradiction number 2. On top of that, when they get done writing this letter, they send Judas and Silas to Antioch with Paul and Barnabas to make sure that this epistle, I guess, is read the way that they wrote it. Now, if Paul is an apostle and they trust him, they wouldn't need to send anyone else. But they did. Acts 15 and 27 is, "We have sent therefore Judas and Silas, who shall also tell you the same things by my mouth." And finally, why did Paul and Barnabas part ways? According to Luke, let's go to Luke in Acts 15. From Acts 15:37 to Acts 15:39, Barnabas wanted to bring John, whose surname was Mark. Paul didn't. And the contention was so sharp between them that they departed asunder one from the other, and so Barnabas took Mark and sailed unto Cyprus. That's how Luke recalls it. But Paul, of course, wonder of wonders, has a whole different recount of why he and Barnabas fell out. According to Paul, sometime between the time Silas and Judas arrived in Antioch and the time that Paul had arrived at Antioch, somehow Peter came to Antioch. Now that doesn't jive with what Luke wrote in Acts. In Acts, he said that once they were dismissed, they all came to Antioch, the four that were sent: Paul, Barnabas, Silas, and Judas. Peter wasn't sent to Antioch. He didn't volunteer to go. He was not mentioned at all. But Paul asserts that he came anyway, and says that he withstood him to the face about eating with the Gentiles, and somehow when the other Jews came, he decided he didn't want to be seen with the Gentiles. His story just doesn't add up. Peter wasn't sent to Antioch. So, if he was, why didn't Luke record it? That's the first problem. The second problem is basically that he says, for before that certain came from James, he did eat with the Gentiles. But when they were come, he withdrew and separated himself, fearing them which were of the circumcision. Now he says, before that certain came from James, meaning the people that James sent with this letter to read to the church in Antioch, which we already know in Acts, they all came down together. Paul is lying. He says the reason why Barnabas parted ways is because of these Jews. He says, and the other Jews dissembled likewise with him, meaning Peter, insomuch that Barnabas also was carried away with their dissimulation. Luke already told us why Barnabas left. He wasn't carried away by some dissimulation of the Jews and Peter and all this basic crap that Paul is saying. He left simply because they got into it about bringing his friend John, whose surname was Mark, on them in their travels.